I'm devastated. I love them. And I can't believe that this has happened, and I'm so sorry that they have lost their lives.
Police say you're a suspect. Do you have anything to say about
Yes,
that?
I say I didn't do anything. I love them.
Before we begin, I need to give you a serious content warning. This case involves the deliberate poisoning and murder of 3 people who trusted the person who invited them to lunch. We'll be discussing death cap mushrooms, severe organ failure, and the devastating betrayal of family trust. The details are disturbing. If you need to step away at any point, please do. Your well-being comes first. This is the case of Erin Patterson. I'm devastated. I love them, and I can't believe this has happened. Those are the words of Erin Patterson, standing outside her home in regional Victoria, Australia, tears streaming down her face, voice cracking with emotion. 3 people are dead. 1 is fighting for his life in intensive care, and Erin is the chef who served them all lunch. Police say you're a suspect. Do you have anything to say about that? I didn't do anything? I love them. Here's the thing about this case. It starts almost mundane. Think of a family meal around the kitchen table, the sort of thing that usually ends with awkward small talk and tea before settling down for TV. That's how this story should have ended. But instead, it became one of Australia's most internationally recognized murder investigations. Because Erin Patterson invited her former in-laws over for lunch. Beef Wellington, mashed potatoes, green beans, and that menu came with a few unoptional extras.
I would say that.
This is the story of how death cap mushrooms, a food dehydrator, and the world's blandest murderer turned an ordinary Sunday lunch into mass murder. Welcome to the case of Erin Patterson. Welcome to Melbourne. Folks, now, Melbourne needs no formal introduction. It's a vibrant city in Victoria, Australia,
More
coffee
shops
culture,
than you can ever
warm weather,
imagine.
F1 racing, the Australian Open, the Great Ocean Road, and seriously, more coffee shops than you can ever imagine visiting. But another thing Melbourne does very well is good healthcare. Australia consistently ranks in the top 3 countries for healthcare internationally. The medical system here is world-class, which is why when something unusual happens, doctors notice fast. And on the cool afternoon of July 29th, 2023, doctors in 2 regional hospitals here in Victoria noticed something subtly unusual. Several patients had arrived within just a couple hours of each other, all from the same family, all complaining of similar symptoms. Don and Gail Patterson checked into Dandenong Hospital, located about 30 miles southeast of Melbourne. Meanwhile, Heather and Ian Wilkinson arrived at Leongatha Hospital, 50 miles further into the countryside. At first glance, this looked like a brutal case of food poisoning, the kind that ruins your weekend and makes you swear you'll never eat that dish again. Severe nausea, violent vomiting, intense abdominal pain. However, when their symptoms didn't ease up and instead escalated to frightening levels, doctors knew they had something unusual on their hands. And when they realized multiple people were deteriorating at the same pace, at the same time, they started asking much harder questions. What on earth had these people eaten? In the midst of their collapse, doctors scrambled to understand what happened. And that's when they learned about the lunch. It turns out that on that same Sunday afternoon, all 4 of these patients had attended a family meal together at the home of Erin Patterson in Leongatha. Now, this is worth highlighting. In the weeks leading up to that lunch, the relationship between Erin and her former husband's family had become quite strained, awkward at best. With the breakdown of their marriage, the vibe between them was no longer relaxed like it once used to be. But here's what makes it strange. 5 people attended that lunch. 4 of them were now severely ill in hospital, and only 1 had no symptoms whatsoever. The chef. Now, it is worth noting that on the same day as the lunch, Erin had also checked into hospital after reporting similar but milder symptoms. However, by evening she had discharged herself and gone home. But isn't that odd? Because while everybody else was getting worse, Erin felt not only good enough, but confident enough to return home. As the hours passed, doctors realized this was no longer behaving like food poisoning at all. Their patients were declining way too rapidly, way too severely. And then the lab reports came back, conclusive for alpha-amanitoxin, beta-amanitoxin, and phallotoxins. Specialist doctors realized what they were likely dealing with. A tiny fungus called death cap mushrooms, one of the most lethal natural poisons known to medicine, and suddenly, that quiet family lunch did not look like simple bad cooking anymore. Let me tell you about Erin Patterson, because she is one of the most interesting yet boring characters I've ever covered. If I had to describe her as a meal, she would not be beef Wellington. I think soggy white bread with a thin slice of unsalted butter is more fitting. Seriously, if blandness were a competitive sport, Erin would absolutely win gold. On the surface, she did not present as the sort of person you'd expect at the center of a mass poisoning case. She was just a mother living in regional Victoria, leading what looked like a relatively ordinary suburban life. There was no dramatic criminal history, no long trail of violent behavior. She was just someone who, to neighbors and acquaintances, appeared very unremarkable. Erin had been married to Simon Patterson, the son of Don and Gail Patterson. Their relationship had sadly broken down in the years prior. However, despite their separation, she still remained in contact with Simon's parents. And on the face of it, that dynamic seemed perfectly fine. They were still the grandparents to her daughter. Of course, as for Erin, she had tragically lost her own mother only a few years prior. Don't get me wrong, the relationship was certainly strained at times, but not outwardly hostile. And that's partly what made her lunch invitation seem so normal to the rest of the family. She was just a separated mother inviting her former in-laws over to talk, reconnect, maybe smooth things over. Friends and family describe Erin as someone who was particular, controlled, keenly aware of how she presented herself. She wasn't eccentric or dramatic. She was just deliberate. The kind of person who seemed composed on the surface, even when the situation around her was anything but. Let me tell you about the people Erin invited to lunch. Don and Gail Patterson were Erin's former in-laws. Simon's parents, her daughter's grandparents. Despite the divorce, they had maintained a relationship with Erin, because family is complicated, because they loved their granddaughter. Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, and her husband, Ian, were also invited. By all accounts, these were good people, kind people, the sort of people who show up when invited because they believe in family. Erin would later describe Gail as like, the mom I didn't have, because my mom passed away 4 years ago. She said Gail had never been anything but good and kind to her. Ian and Heather, she said, were some of the best people she'd ever met. They never did anything wrong to me. Those were her words. On camera, tears streaming down her face. And here's the thing. She was probably telling the truth about that part. These people probably were kind to her. They probably were good people. Which makes what happened next even more horrific. There was one more person invited to that lunch. Simon Patterson, Erin's estranged husband, the son of Don and Gail, the father of Erin's daughter, but Simon chose not to attend at the last minute. At the time, it likely felt like typical post-separation dynamics. You know the type. Avoiding awkward tension. I'll skip it this time. Perfectly normal. But that decision probably saved his life. Because Simon would later testify that in the months and years leading up to their divorce, he had become suspicious of Erin. Suspicious that she was trying to poison him. He became so paranoid about it that he stopped eating her meals altogether. Let me repeat that. Simon Patterson had become so convinced his wife was trying to poison him that he refused to eat anything she cooked. And then, after they separated, she invited his entire family over for lunch. And he didn't go. I'd say his instincts were pretty good. Going back to the hospital, doctors were alarmed by what they were seeing. Not only had toxicology reports come back positive for alpha-amanitoxin, but their patients had extremely high ALT levels in their livers. Their symptoms almost perfectly aligned with poisoning from Amanita phalloides, more commonly known as the death cap mushroom, a species so toxic that even eating a small amount can literally destroy your liver beyond repair. Now, these mushrooms are quite interesting, and they're something I was never aware of before this story. They don't grow in dark, forbidden forests or hard-to-reach caves. They just grow quietly in ordinary places, under oak trees, in suburban parks, along footpaths, even in gardens. Originating from Europe, they've found a comfortable home in parts of Australia, and, to an untrained eye, they don't look sinister at all. In fact, from what I've heard, they don't even taste bad. They just sit there, waiting to be eaten, and that's what makes them so dangerous. As the hours turned into days, time served no kindness to any of them. Tragically, Dawn and Gail would pass away next to each other, and Heather would follow shortly afterwards, all due to severe organ failure. Ian would thankfully survive, but he had a very long road ahead of him in intensive care. Over the space of only a couple of days, one single meal had effectively wiped out multiple members of the same family. And strangely, the chef was totally fine. It's no surprise then that detectives turned their attention toward Erin, and the way she handled the media interview was, well,
It was some of the best people that I've ever met. Gail was like...
Take your time.
Gail was the mum that I didn't have because my mum passed away 4 years ago. And Gail's never been anything but good and kind to me. And Ian and Heather were some of the best people I've ever met. They never...
Were they fixing the property area?
I just asked you to leave me alone now, please.
Police say you're a suspect. Do you have anything to say about
Yes,
that?
I say I didn't do anything. I love them. And I'm devastated that they're gone. And I hope...
Can anyone say crocodile tears now? Look, I'm not saying people can't be genuinely devastated, but there's something about the performance quality here that feels off. She's devastated. She loved them. They were the best people. And yet, they're all dead. From a meal she cooked, and she's perfectly fine. With 3 deaths and 1 very suspicious-looking chef. Detectives now had the complex task of proving if Erin was guilty or just plain stupid. But where do you even begin with a story like this? By now, they were pretty sure it was death cap mushrooms. But how do you prove if this was an accident or something far more nefarious? The problem is that these mushrooms are naturally sourced, meaning there's no bank statement, no receipts, no surveillance footage of purchase. So what are they supposed to do? Well, as it turns out, Erin would make so many of her own mistakes that she would basically prove it for them. As they began early investigations, detectives found that the meal may have contained a mixture of both store-bought mushrooms and others that were foraged. And that was crucial information, because that distinction would end up mattering a lot. If toxic mushrooms had accidentally been gathered and mixed into the meal, this case could point toward a catastrophic mistake. However, if they had been knowingly sourced, dried, or stored beforehand, that's when things start to feel less like a kitchen accident and more like a deliberate menu choice. So with this now being an active case involving multiple deaths, police decided it was time to interview Erin properly. And I'm not sure what you're going to think about this one, but to me, she looks incredibly displeased to be there. Also, why is she blinking so often?
Following eating at your house, Donald, Ian, Gail and Heather all become so ill that they ultimately ended up in the intensive care unit at both the Dandenong Hospital and moved to the Austin Hospital. Alright. Following that, they had a deterioration in their condition, and that they become so ill that their livers have failed. Right? Heather and Gail passed away. Right? Conversely, we're trying to understand why you're not that ill. Okay? So you understand why we're interviewing you today?
Yeah, I do. But I'm sure you understand too that I've never been in a situation like this before, and I've been very, very helpful with the health department through the week because I wanted to help that side of things as much as possible because I do want to know what happened. So I've given them as much information as they've asked for and offered up all the food and all the information about where the food came from.
Obviously we've got concerns in relation to these mushrooms and where they've come from. Okay. Is that something you've done in the past, foraging for mushrooms or anything like that? Never.
That's interesting, because we're about to find out she was lying. Police began working backwards through the timeline. They looked through Erin's shopping records, her phone data, her movements around Leongatha and nearby towns, basically anything that could help them reconstruct what she'd been doing, and that included surveillance footage. But it was in the middle of their search of Erin's home that one of the officers found something interesting, a manual for a food dehydrator. Now, up until this point, this food dehydrator had done absolutely nothing wrong in its life. But little did the poor old dehydrator know that it was about to become one of the most discussed appliances in Australian criminal history. So, what precisely is a food dehydrator? It's kind of self-explanatory. It's used to remove moisture from food by slowly circulating warm air until ingredients become dried and preserved. People use them for fruit slices, jerky, herbs. It's not exactly the kind of device you'd associate with a homicide investigation. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone using this in true crime before. Yet here we are.
You were at home and present when we did a search warrant today, alright? I know you weren't watching everyone at all the time, but I just want to go through on tape some of the stuff we've, and like I said, we'll give you a copy of this, everything we've seized. Kitchen, far left bottom drawer, instruction manual for a Sunbeam food lab, electronic dehydrator. What's that in relation to? Do you know anything about a dehydrator in your house? Or?
And here's where it gets good. As investigators looked closer at how the meal may have been prepared, they began to consider that maybe the mushrooms weren't used fresh at all. When forensics analyzed the kitchen, they realized that although the dehydrator itself was missing, there were several items linked to that dehydrator, and those items contained traces consistent with death cap mushrooms. Moving away from the crime scene for a moment, doctors were not entirely reassured by Erin's behavior either. It's true that she attended the hospital on the same day as the others, but it's also true that she left far more quickly than even medical staff were comfortable with. In fact, her early discharge raised enough concern that doctors later questioned whether she had fully grasped the severity of what she was dealing with. This stuck out to me, because if there was even a small chance you'd been exposed to the same toxin, most people would beg to stay at the hospital. After checking herself out, doctors had this conversation with police.
So this is Dr. Chris Webster calling from Leongatha Hospital, and I have a concern regarding a patient that presented here earlier but has left the building and is potentially exposed to a fatal toxin from mushroom poisoning, and I've tried several times to get hold of her on her mobile phone.
So before I get all that information in, what address do you need the police to attend, Dr. Chris?
Yeah, so, well, should I give the hospital address or the address of the patient?
If you know where they are, their address.
I have the address of the patient.
Yeah, go ahead with that.
Okay.
What's her name?
So the last name is Patterson.
First name?
Erin.
Mushroom poisoning, you said.
Yeah, so there were 5 people that ate a meal on Saturday, and 2 of them are in intensive care at Dandenong Hospital. 2 have just been transferred from Leongatha Hospital to Dandenong Hospital, and Erin presented this morning with symptoms of poisoning.
And what happened when she presented? She just got up and left?
No, there was time for the nurse to begin observations, and I was managing the other critically unwell patient, so I had a brief chat to her about where the mushrooms were obtained, and after that, while I was attending the other patients, the nurse informed me that she had discharged herself against medical advice.
While 4 other people were dying in hospital from the same meal, and that wasn't all. Then came the surveillance footage, and it's probably some of the most damning evidence Erin would have to face. While investigators were tracking Erin's movements in the days and weeks before and after the deaths, they found something interesting. Only 4 days after that fateful lunch, a surveillance camera at the local tip spotted Erin's car pulling up. Typical Australian countryside in the background. Erin gets out of the car, picks up a dehydrator from the boot, walks over, dumps it in the warehouse, returns to her car, drives away. Now look, Outside of environmental factors, throwing away a kitchen appliance is not automatically suspicious, but when you throw away a dehydrator shortly after a deadly mushroom poisoning, that's one way of making yourself known to police. Oh, and just to be explicit here, the manual they found in her house was for the exact model she dumped at the tip, the same dehydrator she lied about not having, and that wasn't it either. Only 45 minutes after the family lunch, a surveillance camera captured her disposing of cardboard at the same local tip. Unfortunately, that cardboard was never found, so we don't know what it contained. But what it does show is someone potentially trying to remove evidence. As all of these details became known to the public, the overall tone of this case changed dramatically. I even remember hearing about this case when it happened, how the general opinion went from believing it was just an accident to thinking maybe Erin did have something to do with it. And that's not it either. There were other things coming out too. For example, there was this text message, which basically confirms Erin was sneaking mushrooms into the kids' brownies. Now, those mushrooms were totally normal. Those kids are absolutely fine. However, what it does show is that Erin was secretly trying to put things into people's food without their knowledge, a pattern of behavior. And speaking of mobile phones, that wasn't the end of it. What you're watching right now is body cam footage of detectives taking Erin's phone away from her in the days after the murders. The detective at the table asks for her PIN code. She gives him one number, then another. It turns out both of them were incorrect, because this device didn't have a PIN at all, which is a slightly odd mistake to make. Right, most of us use our phone code dozens of times a day. It's kind of like muscle memory. To confidently provide two wrong codes for a phone that apparently didn't require one, that raises an eyebrow. And that's because this was not her usual phone at all. It was a secondary device, a dummy phone. How's that for innocent?
So it's 3:29 p.m. on the 5th of August 2023. Thanks for your patience today, Erin. We're completing our search. The only outstanding item is that mobile phone that you've got there. So I'll seize that now from you. Is there a PIN code on your phone?
Yeah.
Do you know what it is?
It's either 1315 or 131528. I can't remember which one.
There's a provision in the warrant that requires you to assist us to get into these devices.
Is it opening? Oh, okay, well,
Don't know one,
no one, so there you
Okay,
go. Your job's easy.
Yeah.
Good job. Erin, it's kind of obvious how this story went. In November 2023, after multiple months of investigation, Victoria Police officially arrested Erin Patterson. She was charged with 3 counts of murder relating to the deaths of Dawn Patterson, Gail Patterson, and Heather Wilkinson. And on top of that, 1 count of attempted murder for Ian Wilkinson. Erin would plead not guilty, because even from the get-go, she played the victim card extraordinarily well. The prosecution believed Erin had planned and prepared a meal with clear intent. However, Erin and her defense team pushed back strongly. They argued the poisoning had been a total accident, that her behavior afterwards had been misinterpreted. They emphasized that she was a victim too, just as much as the others, that she must have a good immune system, that she was just lucky. They also emphasized that her estranged husband, Simon, hadn't even attended the lunch. They argued that if she really wanted revenge against him, if she really wanted custody over everything, she would have made sure he went down with his family. Either way, I bet Simon feels incredibly fortunate not to have attended last minute. But of course, he must now deal with so much grief, loss, and pain. One piece of evidence had to be excluded from court, but one that I think is very telling. Investigators found a document titled Homicidal Poisons on Erin's phone. I'm not sure why this was disqualified, but it shows clear knowledge or awareness of what was to come. Simon would also testify that in the months and years leading up to the divorce, he had become suspicious of Erin trying to poison him. He had become so paranoid that he stopped eating her meals altogether. Ian Wilkinson, the only one to survive that lunch, was also there to testify. Given the circumstances, he was very calm, composed, and factual. He confirmed the lunch felt quite ordinary. No one felt awkward or uncomfortable. It's clear everyone trusted Erin, and Erin seemed her usual self, After weeks of trial, the jury finally returned with their verdict. In the end, they found her guilty on all 3 counts of murder, plus 1 count of attempted murder. The judge described her crimes as deliberate and devastating, carried out under the ordinary facade of a shared family meal. And I think that's the part that really hits hard, because Erin murdered her own family through an act of kindness and nurture. She was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 33 years, meaning with time already partially served. She could be free in the year 2060. By then, she'll be 82 years old. As the verdict was read out, Erin just sat there with a flat, vacant expression. You would hope in moments like this she might be reflecting. However, it's hard to escape the feeling that nothing was going on in there. The weird part about this story is that even to this day, nobody quite understands why Erin wanted to murder all 4 of her guests. By now, we know she undoubtedly did. But still, why, during sentencing, the judge highlighted how much premeditation went into this creative way of mass murder. It was clear there was emotion and planning behind Erin's actions. However, those emotions don't point toward anything in particular. Many of us are still left wondering. We do know Erin was going through a divorce at the time. However, her ex-husband was not there on the day of the murders. And as far as money goes, he didn't have any life insurance either. So the only real motive we can go with is meaningless, petty revenge. And that doesn't even make sense. There's something unsettling about the way this case unfolded. There was no big explosive argument, no obvious warning sign. It was all just a polite invitation for lunch, made by an ordinary family member, that spiraled into mass murder. In its own way, that makes it feel even more terrifying, because as soon as trust and deceit come into the mix, it makes you want to second-guess everything. Now, on the positive side, most dinner hosts won't treat beef Wellington like a chemistry experiment gone wrong, so I do think you're probably fine at your next Sunday roast. As long as the chef's name isn't Erin, I feel bad for the victims too, because this isn't only about the moment they died, it's about everything they were supposed to be forever afterwards. Their lives didn't only end that day, their futures were erased too. And what makes it even more heartbreaking is they didn't go to that lunch expecting any danger whatsoever. They went as family, trusting the person who invited them, Dawn and Gail Patterson, Heather Wilkinson. They deserved so much more than this. They deserved to see their grandchildren grow up, to enjoy their retirement, to live long, happy lives. Instead, they were betrayed in the most fundamental way, by someone they trusted, over a meal meant to bring them together. With so many strange and peculiar details around this case, I wouldn't be surprised if this remains one of Australia's most notorious murder stories for decades to come. In fact, in the months and years that followed, the town of Leongatha saw a tourism boom worth millions of dollars due to the case's notoriety, which is insane when you think about it. But of course, the largest impact here is not on the town itself, it's on the victims and their families. And I just hope they're okay, that they find peace moving forward. Those are my thoughts on this case. But what are yours? Do you think Erin Patterson received the sentence she deserved? Do you believe there was a motive we're missing? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching today. I really appreciate you being here. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue bringing you these important stories. And please, remember this. Trust your instincts. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, listen to that feeling. Set boundaries. Don't be afraid to say no, even if it's family, especially if it's family. To everyone watching, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay safe and stay curious. Thank you and goodbye. Dawn Patterson, Gail Patterson, Heather Wilkinson. They went to lunch as family. They trusted the person who invited them. They deserved to see their grandchildren grow up. They deserved their golden years. They deserved so much more. Taken by betrayal over beef Wellington. Rest in peace. Ian Wilkinson survived, but forever changed. We hope you find peace and healing